Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where we have a new Prime Minister, a chap you may have heard of, goes by the name of Johnson. Boris Johnson, although that was not the name by which he went for the first few years of his life. And it's odd, isn't it? Because if you had to pick a politician about whom you felt you knew a lot, or about whom you felt you'd heard a lot, he'd probably be quite near the top of the list for anybody even close to my age and generation. And I'd probably actually veer 20 years either side, so from 27 to 67. Probably even go younger. Boris Johnson is a household name. Everybody knows who he is. You couldn't have said that about David Cameron or Theresa May. Gordon Brown, obviously a known quantity, having been Chancellor, but famously inscrutable, not somebody whose personality ever came to the fore. So who is Boris Johnson? I don't know. I've been studying him and reporting on him for most of my sort of radio life, actually, oddly, and I'm not quite sure who he is. I veered from being smitten's not quite the right word, but being party to or victim of or fan of his sort of bumbling bonhomie, right through to thinking he is a profoundly dangerous politician. And then the dust settles somewhere between the two positions. For the record, I do lean more towards profoundly dangerous than I do bumbling bonhomie these days. But as with almost every other political opinion I currently hold, I do hope I'm wrong. 17 ministers shown the door in 5 frenzied hours. I think we have to take that number with a pinch of salt. It's perfectly possible that Chris Grayling, having been shown the door, will fail to find it and still turn up for work this morning and indeed tomorrow. But it was certainly what's the word you'd use? Strong. It's certainly a almost violent debut, actually, in political terms from Boris Johnson, with an astonishing revolving door that I don't think anybody expected. And remarkably, you see the departure of people like Liam Fox, who really has spoken up not just for Brexit but also for Atlanticism, as it's called, for most of his career. And then people that have been loyal, like James Brokenshire, shown the door. It's too big, actually, to pick a little bead on, to pick a simple laser-like question that would allow us to cut straight to the heart of the changing political landscape. And I do think it's important not to let the morning pass without reminding ourselves that we now have a Home Secretary who was effectively fired from the last government for lying to the Prime Minister about and not telling her boss, the then Foreign Secretary, although obviously that particular mistake hasn't stayed long in Boris Johnson's consciousness. I suppose what I'm saying, he clearly doesn't bear a grudge about that. He was the Foreign Secretary, but we now have a Home Secretary who was fired effectively by the last Prime Minister from the same party for lying about secret meetings with foreign politicians, Israeli politicians, businessmen and lobbyists. And we have a Secretary of State for Education who was fired from the last government because the Prime Minister believed that he'd leaked state secrets. It almost makes Dominic Raab look like the gifted one. But Dominic Raab, of course, discovered the importance of Dover to Calais shortly after becoming Secretary of State for Brexit. He's now Foreign Secretary. Calais is just under 30 miles away from the United Kingdom. And given that the importance of Calais came as a shock to our new Foreign Secretary, I suspect we're in for some treats if he is honest enough to admit things that come to him as news in his new role. And then some of the other characters that were perhaps expected to hang around have not. Penny Mordaunt, it's been reported she left Defence, not in a fit of pique. It was the phrase I was about to reach for, but it's not a fit of pique. It reached her ears that Jeremy Hunt had been offered her job and she wasn't interested in any other. So the highway for Penny Mordaunt. Some odd faces coming back in, faces that perhaps you might have felt had covered themselves in sufficient lack of glory in the past that they would have precluded themselves from high political office. Grant Shapps, Theresa Villiers. And yet here we are, a big cabinet, suggestions from some that there's some sort of far-right coup underway. There may be, and if I come to believe that there is, I promise you, employ that phrase, but I'm certainly not employing it today. I'm not employing it yet. I'm drawn to two questions. One about Boris Johnson in particular, and one about the cabinet in general. The Boris Johnson in particular question is the tricky one, because I've asked variations on this for years, and I think you, like me, are probably a little bit bored of the Marmite treatment of the topic. I really like him, but can't really tell you why. I don't really like him, but can't really tell you why. Or we could point at various episodes from his political past and claim evidence for whatever our preconceived position may have been. Just so you know, it's big today, obviously. It's epochal, it's historic. We'll take Boris Johnson's speech in the House of Commons live from about 11:30. It means we won't be doing Mystery Hour today. We'll hopefully do it tomorrow, events permitting. But, you know, this is I know some people get upset about that, and I understand why. The notion of light relief this week would be particularly welcome, but you know, nobody can pretend that Mystery Hour is more important than the opening speech to Parliament of a new Prime Minister, not even its biggest fans. But the problem with Boris Johnson is that I've asked almost every question I can think of, and I've asked you countless times almost every question I can think of. Where is the new one? What are you cheerful about? So I think we have to look at policy, not politician, or indeed personality today. And here's what I think. Here's what I see to be the unravelable knot. There are now, thanks largely to the so-called Brexit party, there are now a lot of people persuaded that they want to leave the European Union with no deal. They actually think it's desirable. Now, I don't know how movable they are. Will they move back to pretending that actually leaving the European Union with a deal is a good idea? All of which is, of course, demonstrably inferior to remaining. But that argument we can put in the fridge today. Here's what I see Boris Johnson's big problem as being, and I'd love you to have a look at it with me. The tension at the heart of his administration and at the heart of the policy platform that he unveiled yesterday is no deal Brexit. That is the I always remembered this. I can't say this word without having a little flashback to diagrams that I drew in my physics exercise book when I was at prep school. No deal Brexit is the fulcrum. Anyone else just see a little picture of a triangle and a ruler balanced on top? No? I've probably got it wrong, haven't I? My apologies. No deal Brexit is the fulcrum upon which everything has to be balanced. And what is really weird is what you see at either end of that scale, what you see at either end of that balance. Because at one end, you now have a significant swathe of the population persuaded that they want no deal. Not only that they want no deal, this is the really interesting sort of psychological contortion that's been undertaken. They are persuaded that they wanted no deal all along. And that's what worries me about Johnson's first task, is that the history of Brexit suggests that once these people have assumed a new position, they will not move back from it. So these are the people that voted because they thought they'd be richer, voted because they thought they'd be freer, voted because they thought there'd be an economic boost, and now they are pretending that they voted to be poorer, and they voted for job losses, and they voted for economic damage because it is a price worth paying for, and then, you know, fill in whatever blank you prefer: power, sovereignty, control. They've now moved, as you know, from the position that they wanted job losses, and they've gone further. They definitely want no deal, however bad it may be, because it's a price worth paying for. Fill in whatever blanks you want. Will they move back? Will you? Am I describing you? Would you move back? Because on the other end of the scale, you've got Boris Johnson portraying no deal as undesirable, bad for Britain, but the fact that we're prepared to do it will focus the minds of the European Union into offering some sort of concession to us that would make it possible for Boris Johnson to get a withdrawal agreement, a slightly adjusted withdrawal agreement, through the House of Commons. I'm sorry if you're expecting fireworks this morning. I think it's more important, for the time being at least, to get stuck into the detail and to try and get a proper idea of what the road ahead looks like. There'll be plenty of time for fireworks and, shall we say, robust assessments of the CVs of some of the new members of the cabinet in the coming days. But today I want to work out what's on the road ahead. And that tension between people persuaded that they actually want no deal, and if you are a supporter of the so-called Brexit party, I hope I'm not doing you a disservice when I say that's the whole point of that business, is people who, and I'm going to say pretending, because you certainly didn't think this 6 months ago or a year ago, and my goodness me, you didn't think it 3 years ago, but pretending that they wanted no deal all along. And there's, 15 to 25% of the electorate in that category now. Johnson's got to take them with him, while also acknowledging that no deal is profoundly undesirable and damaging, but it's something we are fully prepared to do in order to make the European Union do what we want. And then I'm afraid we're back to Groundhog Day. Because why would that do it? Why would threatening to hurt ourselves and in the process hurt them a bit, let's make no mistake about that, in the case of Ireland, probably quite a lot, why would that make them retreat from their position of the integrity and the importance of the four freedoms? And I can't see it. I'll tell you something I haven't told you before. I probably alluded to it, or certainly if you listen every day, you probably work this out for yourself. But every day almost for the last 3 years, I've wondered. I said to you, I have said to you before, the flesh-coloured body stocking. Do you remember the flesh-coloured body stocking? So you'd sit there staring at this naked emperor, wondering why everybody else in the crowd was waxing lyrical about the luxurious nature of his ermine robes, and you'd be sitting there being a cheeky little fellow with a snotty nose, going, oh, he's not got any kecks on, mum. He's not got any kecks on. He's naked. Look, you can see his quivering buttocks. And everyone else in the crowd is going, no, shut up, you're stupid. It's only clever people that can see his clothes. Thick people can't see them. We can see his clothes. They're wonderful, lovely clothes. Hurrah for the emperor. Hurrah, hurrah for the emperor. And you sit there thinking, no, he's naked, mum. He's not got any clothes on. But there's so many people saying that he has that you begin to doubt your own eyes. You begin to think in this crowd, because you're surrounded by people going, lovely robes, your highness. You begin to think, well, maybe he's wearing a flesh-coloured body stocking. And I did this with Theresa May. I didn't imagine Theresa May in a flesh-coloured body stocking. That would be weird, any more than I'm currently imagining Boris Johnson in one. But you do think, and I did think with Theresa May, maybe they know something we don't. I thought it almost every day, right up until her resignation, which was obviously necessitated by the fact that she didn't know anything that we didn't know. Everything is as it seems. Everything is clear. So Boris Johnson's first day in office has seen him resurrect and reanimate an awful lot of the things that Theresa May has spent 3 years doing and saying, in the hope that something would somehow change. And the only way it makes sense to me and to many of you in the crowd alongside me, looking increasingly askance at our neighbours raving about the quality of the emperor's clothes, the only thing that makes sense is whether or not Boris Johnson and his team know something that the rest of us don't know. Whether or not they've been given some indication that the European Union would somehow contemplate abandoning the position it's held consistently for 3 years in order to do a favour for a man who's compared them to concentration camp guards and dedicated his entire career to maligning the entire institution. And it's happened again. As soon as I say these words out loud, well, however much frenzied thinking I do before I come on air, however much benefit of the doubt I give to people like Theresa May and Boris Johnson, Dominic Raab and Priti Patel, as soon as I actually say the words out loud, as soon as I exercise my privilege of being able to think out loud in front of you every morning, and what a privilege it is, I start to wonder what the hell is going on, because, look, he's got no clothes on. Unless Boris Johnson knows something that we don't know. Do you think he does? I mean, there's the fundamental question. He needs to keep sweet people who've persuaded themselves that they wanted no deal all along, while simultaneously using the threat of no deal's undesirability to somehow spook the European Union into abandoning a position they've held for 3 years. And that just isn't going to happen, is it? I think, for the record, and just as a sort of director's cut on my July 2018 prediction that we were heading towards no deal or no Brexit, I think Johnson actually has a better chance of getting that withdrawal agreement through Parliament than Theresa May did. But when I tell you how many members of the current cabinet voted for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement at the last time of asking, you, like me, will begin to wonder, what on earth is going to happen next? The question I think that we'll start with today, thank you for indulging my introduction, I think you'll agree with the analysis. This fulcrum of no-deal Brexit is the issue upon which everything teeters in a way. If I asked you, what for you personally, okay, the key differences between Boris Johnson and Theresa May, not in terms of optimism or nebulous adjectives about what we perceive his character or lack of to be. As I say, we'll get back to that kind of caustic analysis in the coming days, but not today. Today, politics, not personality. What's the difference between Boris Johnson and Theresa May? Take a moment and then hit the phone, okay? Don't hit it, unless you're really, really frustrated by the new incumbent at 10 Downing Street. Hit the numbers, 0345 6060 because as far as I can tell, we've been treading water for 3 years, and all we've really done now is change the personnel, not the mission or the policy. You can, I suppose, say Theresa May was never prepared to leave with no deal, but she did dedicate a significant part of her premiership to insisting that she was. She coined the phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal. Probably her biggest mistake, although, again, that's a show that we'll do in the coming days. Biggest differences. Why do you think Boris Johnson, I don't know if you can answer this actually without reference to personality, but I'd ask you to try. Why do you think Boris Johnson will be able to do what Theresa May couldn't? Okay? And I'll take any answer you've got. Also, it is one of those mornings where you can ring in slightly off central topic and start or contribute to a conversation from slightly different angles. Anna is in Muswell Hill. Anna, what would you like to say?
Mr. O'Brien, good morning.
Hello.
I'd like to start by answering your last bit of the question.
Yes.
Where you said that, what did you just say? How can Boris Johnson do anything different than Theresa May?
Yeah, or what makes people think he might be able to do what she couldn't do?
The preceding question to that should be, what is it exactly that he's going to do that Theresa May couldn't?
Yes.
What are we expecting of him? Are we expecting him to sort of, quote-unquote, deliver no deal? Or are we expecting him to deliver a deal?
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So,
no, not really, no. I mean, I do spend quite a lot of time working out which questions to ask. You're more than welcome to ring in and ask yourself a completely different one, but if we crack on with answering it, then hopefully the clouds will clear slightly, Anna.
Right, okay. It's about what is expected of him. He says that he will deliver a deal by the 31st of October.
Or he won't.
Or he won't.
That's the amazing thing, isn't it? Except that...
Yes.
Except that he is in exactly the same position as Theresa May was, just with a much shorter time.
The difference is, fortunately or unfortunately, he was one of the instrumental people in the Vote Leave campaign. So he has the trust of the people that actually voted.
That's good news for everybody, oddly, that they have to own it now. They ran for the hills at the first opportunity in the immediate aftermath. Johnson, because he saw this on the horizon, the glittering prize of the premiership. But in the context of what policy changes it means for Brexit, that question I don't think either of us at the moment can answer. What can he do differently, given that Donald Tusk told us not to waste this time about 100 days ago. 26 minutes after 10, 0345 6060 And I do think, actually, regardless of how you feel about Brexit, this cabinet owns it, and that can only be a good thing. He has surrounded himself with true believers. What they believe in is still a little bit hard to pin down beyond Brexit, and it's all myriad interpretations. But there's nobody now at top table who gets to say, well, I never wanted to do this anyway. Even Jeremy Hunt has been thrown to the Wolves for not being a true believer enough. And he did pretty well in the leadership election, relatively speaking. So, you know, that old misattributed description of Einstein's definition of insanity is you keep banging your head against a brick wall, or you keep doing the same thing again and again and again and again in the hope of getting a different result. I don't want to put that yet on Johnson. I want you to tell me what he's going to do differently that makes and what the prize then becomes. He will behave differently, and therefore he will secure something that Theresa May couldn't secure, and that can only be a deal, because anyone can secure no deal. You just don't turn up for work for the next 2 months, and then it happens naturally on October the 31st, kind of. Darren's in Barnet. Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think the main difference is the negotiating stance, really. As Michel Barnier said, Theresa May never put "we'll walk away" on the table. The moment that Johnson has said, "Okay, look, if you don't get a deal, we're going to walk away," then that takes some of the power in the negotiating stance off the European Union, and they had all the power up till then.
So we're back to that. No deal is better than a bad deal. It will hurt us more than it hurts you, but we're prepared to do it anyway.
Well,
how is that different from Theresa May?
Well, if you go into a shop and say I want to buy something,
yes,
and I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to get it anyway.
Yes. What are we buying? You know, what's the thing?
Well, we're buying a cooperative trade.
No, analogy. What are we buying in the shop?
Oh, well, basically, if you want to buy, I don't know, a shirt or something.
Okay,
right?
and before we go into the shop, we've burnt all our old shirts, right? So we go in not even wearing a shirt.
No. That's. I'm not sure that's quite true. I don't think we burnt all our own shirts.
Okay, so which shirt is your analogy there? So which shirts do we keep in the event of no deal?
Okay, right. So we've got. We've got.
So we've got 120 free trade agreements at the moment. So let's call them shirts. In the event of no deal, as we go into the European Union trying to buy a new shirt while not actually wearing anything, which of those 120 agreements do we keep in the event of a no deal?
Yeah. Okay.
You need to answer the question for my listeners.
No, I understand that, but I do.
You still haven't answered it.
Have to say,
you do have to answer it first. How many do we keep?
Okay. What you've done is that you've basically practiced abducto ad absurdum, which basically means
I've taken your analogy.
Yeah, you've taken yes.
You still haven't told my listeners how many shirts they're going to have at home.
Okay, well we've got the shirts from all our historical contacts with both the Commonwealth, with both
No, not in the context of negotiated.
You've asked me for an answer, and I'm giving it.
Good. So how many of the current trade agreements in place do we retain in the event of a no-deal Brexit? You said you're going to give me an answer.
Okay. Right. At the moment, probably none.
Pardon?
At the moment, probably none.
Why did you say probably?
Okay. Right. Now, can I...
So you're in the shirt shop, having set fire to every shirt. Having set fire to every shirt you've ever bought. You're standing in the shirt shop bareback, I believe is the phrase.
No, James.
And this is a good negotiating tactic. Carry on.
Okay. No. You said I answer your question, then I can say what I wanted to say.
And now you can. So we've got no trade deals.
I've answered your question, and I said probably none.
Yes.
So what I'd like to now say is what I wanted to say. Before.
Good.
Okay. Now, what the problem that you've just done is that you've taken an analogy, right, and you've not twisted it, but you've extended it to the point of absurdity.
But it was your analogy.
No, yes, it's my analogy.
So we're in your shop.
As analogies and metaphors, as you very well know, are only up to a certain point.
Yes.
Once you extend them past that point, then of course it becomes absurd.
Well, good. I'm glad we both agree that your analogy is absurd. So back to the negotiating position.
No. Your extension of my analogy is absurd.
Oh, okay.
My analogy, as far as
so I shouldn't have asked you any questions about it, and then it would have sounded clever.
No, because I've given you an analogy, and I'm trying to explain to you what I mean.
Yes.
You've then taken it and stretched it into absurdity.
I apologise for making your analogy sound absurd.
No, your extension was absurd. My analogy wasn't.
Okay, so we're back to the shop.
If I could just say what I wanted to say. Now,
please.
Okay, so in any negotiating stance, if you're not prepared to walk away, you give power to the other party. Okay?
No,
now,
not okay.
By not agreeing,
not okay. For the reason that's just become clear, and which by your own admission is absurd.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm sorry, could you...
Yes, of course I can. It's only a powerful negotiating position if you walk back to everything you had before you started negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a powerful negotiating position if, by abandoning negotiations, you end up with considerably less than you had before, which is why, actually, my extension of your analogy was not absurd. It's the analogy that's absurd.
No, okay, because, okay, now...
Take your time.
We can walk back to the World Trade... We can walk back to the WTO and the GATT agreements, okay?
No, we can't. No, we can't do that, except with the European Union's permission. Well, do you really need me to tell you this after 3 years?
Well, yeah.
Okay,
because,
well then I will.
Okay,
no, because that's fair. I do this for a living, you don't. The reason that we can't do that is because Article 24 of GATT is a interim position that's put in place between two parties that have already agreed a trade agreement.
Article 24. I didn't mention Article 24.
Oh, so which article of GATT are you talking about?
The basic stuff.
Well, go on. What's the basic stuff?
Where any country can trade with any other country using the WTO basic rules, which means we put tariffs on things, which I totally understand. Now, that gives us two things. It gives us one, okay, it gives us, and I've got to admit, I'm a slight protectionist, right? It gives us the ability to although prices will rise initially, it does give us the ability to actually bring industry back into the country.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does, because, I mean, for example, Nestle...
So why does no country on the planet currently trade on these terms?
Cadbury's are no longer manufacturing in the UK.
Why does no country on the planet currently trade on the terms you describe as desirable?
No, because it's a starting point, okay? Because from that starting point, we can then...
Yes, and this is the point about your analogy, is that we already have...
We can build a relationship with the European Union,
right,
based upon that as a starting point. I'm not saying it's the end
point. But based upon what? I don't understand. You're talking about what the former Director General of the World Trade Organization has described as moving from the first division to the third division. You're describing it as a good idea.
No, I'm not describing it as a good idea. I'm describing it as a starting point.
Right,
okay,
but a starting point that is only necessitated by surrendering all the stuff that we've spent 30 years assembling and negotiating and building.
Yes.
So why is that why is that preferable to what we currently have?
Right, now, also...
Take your time.
The IMF has also said that the European Union over the last 10 years has had very low growth, and they've had a period of high unemployment, and that's due to last for another 10 years.
Okay, listen, I'm 4 minutes late for the news, Darren, and I'd like to thank you, actually, for demonstrating a lot more articulately than I could that absolutely nothing has changed, and the same slogans and the same hollow sound bites and the same misunderstandings are at the very heart of what Boris Johnson has now successfully sold to the country. I had no idea how late it was. I hope you take that as a compliment. What's changed in the terms of negotiations? Because no deal is now probably the most likely outcome, I think. And yet, Boris Johnson's first juggling act is to somehow keep the people drawn to the so-called Brexit party in the air, and they've persuaded themselves that they actually wanted no deal all along, despite being promised for years that we were going to get a brilliant deal. And then at the other end of the balancing act, or the juggling balls, is Johnson's necessary acknowledgement that it's undesirable, it will be bad for us, but we are prepared to do it because it will also be bad for you, and you're so keen to avoid the bad stuff happening to you that you'll give us stuff you don't really want to give us in order to avoid it happening. Brackets, just don't mention that it will hurt us a lot more than it will hurt them. I don't think there's anything controversial there or debatable. I know I say that quite often. I say it for a reason. We have to cross swords on a level playing field. So you, if you're a Brexit quotes party end quotes admirer or supporter or subscriber, I think is the word, isn't it? If you're, then you probably don't argue that you now are persuaded, convinced, adamant that you wanted no deal all along, right? And yet Johnson's negotiating tactic is to acknowledge the undesirability of no deal while simultaneously using it to threaten the European Union into doing something they don't want to do. But it would be better for them than letting us do this thing that we don't want to do either. And then then you get a text like this, which, you know, how do you even begin to... The fact Remainers are hating this suggests it's all good. And that, I guess, is what you cling to, isn't it? This notion that people who understand stuff are saying this doesn't look great, and that must be great, because down with people who understand stuff. Philip's in Barnstaple. Philip, what's changed?
The politics have changed.
Go on.
Theresa May was actually, at the time she came into power, she had a majority. She was trying to negotiate a deal. Boris Johnson's in a different position. He knows that it doesn't matter whether he negotiates a deal or gets no deal. What's important to him and the Conservative Party is getting the current Brexit Party votes to swing behind the Tory Party.
And doesn't that change your first observation slightly, in that he probably, if that is the top priority, then barring some sort of, not miracle, but something currently unforeseeable, he actually favours no deal?
I don't think he really cares. I mean, I'm a strong Remainer.
Okay.
Can't abide the Tory Party, can't abide Johnson, but I can see where the politics are going.
Yes, I think you're right.
I can. But what's happening is that if they manage to negotiate some deal, then whether he gets it through Parliament doesn't really matter. Whether it's no deal or not doesn't really matter to them anymore.
No, it doesn't matter to them or to him, but it sure as hell matters to us.
Well, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
But look at the cabinet that he's appointed. Everyone has had to sign up in blood almost to a potential no-deal outcome. So he's got his troops lined up behind him.
Yes.
So he's quite happy, and people are talking this morning about it being an election cabinet. He's quite happy in the end if Parliament rejects it, and there's no guarantee yet that it would reject the deal if it came back.
No, there isn't, you're right.
Or a deal with some small changes. Yes. It may well get through. He knows that the Remain parties are split around 3 or 4 possible choices.
Yes.
Labour is in complete disarray. His threat is that the Brexit Party continues to attract Tory voters.
Do you think that's all he cares about in the short term?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
If he has to go for an election, it'll be because of no deal, and he will then be effectively saying to the Brexit Party, you want no deal, your voters must get behind...
I wonder... hang on a minute. Let me just have a little think.
He's only got to
I said hang on a minute, let me have a little think. Honestly, stop badgering the witness. It's outrageous behaviour. It should be more like me. Let people speak unfettered and uninterrupted for as long as they please.
The problem is I'm probably a bit like you.
You lucky man. You're right. The fulcrum is no deal, or the Brexit Party, but no deal at least allows us to have 2 positions at either end of the ruler balancing on the fulcrum of no deal. The cabinet looks like a no-deal cabinet, right? Until I remind you that only 2 members of it actually voted against the withdrawal agreement at the last time of asking. That's quite a breathtaking observation or memory. Just 2. I think Patel and Villiers off the top.
With the politics?
Yes, no, which means that although it looks like a very no-deal cabinet, it actually is full of people that voted for the withdrawal agreement at the last time of asking. However, any general election has to be fought on the promise that we are more than happy to go through with no deal, a promise that, if your analysis is correct, Boris Johnson would be preparing actually to break in the event of securing a big enough majority to get the withdrawal agreement through Parliament.
I think I got that.
I think I did. So he needs, in the first, top priority, list his priorities, and I can't be 7 minutes late for this break, mate, so don't take it personally.
Okay, right.
Hang on. Top priority, lance the boil that is the Brexit Party. How do you do that? By putting all the headbangers in the Conservative Party into the cabinet. Job done.
Yeah.
Brexit Party looking at us and thinking, oh, I quite like the cut of their jib. Go to the country, secure a bigger majority, because Labour is currently led by Jeremy Corbyn, so they probably would increase their majority if Labour was led by Gordon the Gopher at the moment. But there it is. They increase their majority, and then they throw the Brexit Party subscribers under a bus by actually getting the withdrawal agreement through Parliament, because deep down, Boris Johnson, for all his vanity and self-serving history, he does know just how disastrous a no-deal Brexit would be.
I'd say it could happen two ways. It might happen that way, or it might happen more likely that he doesn't get a withdrawal agreement.
And if it looks like he's not going to get one, then top priority automatically shifts and becomes, what do I have to do to stay in power? Answer, keep the Brexit Party subscribers happy. Result, no deal Brexit. Boris Johnson blames the EU for everything that goes wrong. And he set the groundwork for that yesterday, just as I told you he would. And this is the central point of entry for our contemplations together this morning. 3 years watching Theresa May pursue a course of, I think I can say this now without being immodest, completely predictable and predicted failure. But it was so obvious that I did occasionally wonder whether maybe, just maybe, she knew something that we didn't, whether there was, if you like, a rabbit in a hat somewhere. I just caught myself this morning doing exactly the same thing with Boris Johnson, looking at what he said yesterday, looking at the fulcrum of no deal and everything that teeters upon it with regard to Brexit, thinking, well, maybe he knows something that we don't. And part of me hopes, still, I know, don't hate me for this, but part of me still hopes that he does, that there is some rabbit to be pulled out of a hat. Because otherwise, I just think this constituency of people who've doubled down on the con and ended up claiming that they wanted no deal all along, I think it will grow, because the usual tactics will be employed. Dangerous, dishonest people will claim that things are going wrong because of blameless individuals and institutions. In this case, it will move to Brussels. Well, why have we ended up crashing out with no deal? Well, they refused to negotiate with us. But they didn't. They negotiated with us for years. And they acceded to our requests and concessions with regard to the British border in Ireland. Ah, yes, but that doesn't matter, James. That's a fact based on evidence. All you need to say is something like, oh, they refused to negotiate with us. They're intransigent, stubborn and mean. And just forget everything that's gone before. Like they need us more than we need them stuff. That I think is where we are. It's so bizarre. Unless there is something that Johnson brings to the table that Theresa May didn't, couldn't, or wouldn't. And that's our point of entry today. Is it possible that he knows something we don't, and that we are going to repeat ourselves, but we will get a different result? 10:51 is the time. Andrew is in Kingston. Is that the United Kingston, Andrew?
Kingston, London.
Okay, thank you. What would you like to say?
Dominic Cummings is the difference. 24 hours ago, I believed that Boris was heading for a fall. But when I heard Dominic Cummings had been, he's the power behind the throne.
Yes.
And Boris is just the chief entertainer. He's the figurehead of the government, but he's Dominic Cummings' puppet. Dominic Cummings' cabinet, and Dominic Cummings has a plan.
Crikey. I hope you're right. Dominic Cummings thought that triggering Article 50 when we did was a terrible mistake. He thinks that the ERG should be treated like a metastasizing tumour and excised from the UK body politic. And he, as recently as December 2017, talked about how it was obvious to everybody who knew what was going on that the backstop agreement effectively ended the negotiations. So oddly, as someone who is often portrayed as a Remainer, I think I'd agree with him about all three of those things. Would you?
Yes. Yes, indeed. He's very savvy. Boris and Dominic Cummings both have the ability to annoy and alienate people. Boris does it unintentionally, and Dominic Cummings does it intentionally.
But that doesn't... yes, I mean, that might be true, but the ERG are a metastasizing tumour. Anyone who didn't understand the significance of the Irish backstop is an idiot, and the ERG should be, and the triggering of Article 50 was a terrible mistake. Now, all three of those things are going to alienate people who like to call themselves Brexiters. Actually, I think, to use a word I normally ban from this programme, it alienates precisely the kind of people that like to call themselves Brexiteers. So how will Dominic Cummings emerge as their hero?
Well, always expect the unexpected. We're in
come on, mate. We can do better than always expect the unexpected.
Your last caller was spot on, actually, and the scenario. I can't improve on the scenario, the political scenario you laid out at the end of the last call.
No. So Cummings somehow, and this is why I'm going to be a little bit impatient with your always expect the unexpected, because you're saying Dominic Cummings is the rabbit in the hat, but I can't tell you why.
Fair enough. What I'm saying is
fair enough from me.
The scenario that you laid out in the last caller would not have worked without Dominic Cummings in the government. He will make the difference.
Interesting, and it makes his appointment more significant, perhaps, than the people I routinely describe as Brexit headbangers who now populate most of the cabinet. But there's a lot of vagary there, Andrew. I'm sure you'll concede. There's an absence of detail, and it was funny that Donald Tusk's very terse and brief note of congratulation yesterday contained the phrase, I think, in detail. Yeah, I think it was hyphenated, so it was, you look forward to cooperating in detail . Now, for those of you not familiar with Dominic Cummings, he is a very divisive figure, but he is, I think, a details person, although his greatest triumph, which was overseeing the law-breaking Vote Leave campaign, of course, was all about not doing detail. So even somebody like him lends himself to a two sides of the same coin analysis. The whole victory of Vote Leave, he was clever, Cummings. He publicly refused to have anything to do with the sort of racism and provocations of the other Leave campaign, while privately acknowledging that they absolutely needed that sort of snake oil and nastiness to propel them over the line. So that unpleasant but politically effective, okay, granted. Second problem with Cummings is that the whole victory of Vote Leave was, by his own analysis, built upon the failure to provide any detail. Now, I imagine, and I don't know the man, I imagine if things had gone differently, his view would have been get over the line by hook or by crook, and then do what we want to do regardless of all the people who voted for a different sort of Brexit, right? And I can buy that. Because, of course, the one thing we've established on this programme, a little bit ahead of the curve, was there's no earthly way that you can bring in a Brexit that is going to satisfy 5 individual Brexit voters, let alone 17.4 million. Cummings's modus operandi would be to say, stuff them. I don't care. We've got the victory now. We've got it in our back pocket. The referendum victory, we won, you lost, get over it. People like me who say, but what have you won? We can just get pushed into the sideline. Shut up, doesn't matter, you lost, get over it. Yeah, but the people who won, they think they won this, this and this, but you can't have this if you have this. Doesn't matter. We will now build the Brexit that we want. And that's a little bit scary, because it's none of the things that decent Brexiters thought they were voting for, like accountability, more democracy, and a decline in unelected bureaucrats. Dominic Cummings, of course, to use a phrase I don't think is particularly meaningful or helpful, but it's one beloved of Brexiters. Dominic Cummings is an unelected bureaucrat. John's in Crystal Palace. John, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, John.
James, I think the main difference between Boris as leader and Theresa May is that Boris will unequivocally throw the DUP under the bus, probably the bus that he went to Ballymena.
Only after an election, though.
No, what I think he may do is negotiate a Northern Ireland only backstop, put that perhaps to a referendum in Northern Ireland.
Just to pause, I think you might be onto something here, but a lot of people listening who consider themselves to be Brexiters won't realise that would involve us going back and saying to Brussels, we want that thing that we told you we wouldn't accept last time round, and you gave us a concession on it because Theresa May had to keep the DUP suite. Johnson will say, stuff the DUP, look at the Conservative Party polling, they don't care about Northern Ireland. If we put the border in the Irish Sea, you're going to have a united Ireland by, 10 past 4, but at least exactly. I'll still be Prime Minister.
a do or die Brexit, he said, and it will be the death of the Union, and the death of the Union will be Irish unity and Scottish independence. Leo Varadkar has muted a Northern Ireland only backstop. Michael Portillo muted it a few weeks ago.
But it wasn't just mooted by Varadkar and Portillo. That was the original negotiated agreement. That the United Kingdom negotiator said we can't accept that.
Yes, Michael Portillo mooted the idea of a possible referendum, a Northern Ireland-only referendum. We know Sinn Féin, SDLP, Alliance, Green. There's a united front for a deal in the context of Ireland, and the Northern Irish electorate will vote to endorse a backstop if it protects jobs and the security and the Good Friday Agreement. The DUP represent 12 to 16%, maybe 18%. Of the electorate. People forget that half of the population of Northern Ireland...
but the DUP they're not the only unionists.
Yes, well, the Ulster Unionists were on the fence on the debate, and they've swung behind Brexit now because they've seen DUP increase.
Because the alternative is the uniting of Ireland. It just is, isn't it? I mean, and they're passionately, their raison d'etre is to resist that.
Well... A united Ireland is an aspiration in my view, and I think a more sensible way forward is a shared Ireland where both identities can coexist.
Well, that's what we've got at the
British
moment.
And Irish. That's what we have. That's
what's under threat.
That's what's under threat.
Yeah.
And I think Boris will not hesitate in shafting Arlene Foster. Penny Mordaunt was out of the cabinet before she could say Timbuktu. So Arlene Foster, what loyalty?
Yes, but the reason why I say I don't think he can do that before a general election is because he needs the DUP support to get anything else through Parliament. The majority pretty much going to be won very, very soon, we think. I don't know that he can do what you describe without having an election first. And if he has an election first and increases his majority, it will do away with the need to keep the DUP sweet. But the notion of throwing unionists under the bus and heralding a de facto unification of Ireland, I think, has been fairly clear for a while. It just, again, as with everything else, John, it's clear to those that can see it, and it's absolutely not clear to those that can't. Crikey, where did that hour go? Apologies if you're expecting me to ignite blue touch papers this morning. I don't think this is a morning for yet another roundup of all the reasons why Boris Johnson is utterly unfit for the highest office in the land. We're going to have to agree to disagree on that. It's weird because I'm agreeing to disagrey with traditional Conservatives who hopefully will return to caring about integrity and fidelity and honesty and decency and I suppose public paternity, if you really want to go all in on this list of moral transgressions. I hope you'll return to caring about it. I hope you haven't just been pretending to care about it all your lives. But today's not the day for that roundup of things that would disqualify most politicians from public office. It's contagious as well. Of course, Boris Johnson's utter unfitness for office it could also be applied to Priti Patel, dismissed from the last government for lying to the Prime Minister, or compelled to resign, for lying to the Prime Minister about secret meetings with the Israeli... I think she met with Netanyahu. She definitely met with a whole bunch of senior Israeli politicians and lobbyists. Gavin Williamson, who's now at Education, sacked as Defence Secretary because the last Prime Minister believed that he'd leaked state secrets. He's only been out for a few weeks. And so the idea that there is a disqualifying standard in British public life now is as dead as a dodo. Has been for a long time, I think, if we're honest. But my goodness me, Boris Johnson certainly ratchets up the observation, doesn't he? What would actually disqualify you from public life in Britain? What would disqualify you from being Prime Minister? You know, having undisclosed love child would have just been so obvious an answer to that question a few years ago. You wouldn't even have said it. You'd just say, don't be stupid. Apart from that, I mean, other stuff. You know, like, I don't know, having the police called to your flat a couple of weeks before you became Prime Minister because your girlfriend was heard shouting, "Get off me," at you. It could have happened for perfectly innocent reasons. This is the bit where the comparisons with Trump hold true. For the record, I don't think that Johnson is anywhere near as vile. I don't think Johnson would stand there allowing a Conservative Party conference to start cheering, send her back, about somebody of Priti Patel's extraction, for example. I just don't believe that. I genuinely don't believe that. I'm not being facetious. But beyond that, the comparisons with Trump are astonishing, because if you have a morally transgressive leader, then you can accommodate a host of transgressions in your top team. Culminating, of course, in Trump's case, with so many of them ending up in jail. But again, I don't think that's going to happen with Boris Johnson's top team. But what is going to happen? What has changed? 0345 6060 973. And how, and we've had cracking calls today, actually, thank you. But how can he simultaneously seduce, that's the word I want, how can he simultaneously seduce the people who are now pretending that they wanted no deal all along, while also acknowledging the disaster that no deal would be, but using it as leverage to somehow persuade the European Union to do stuff they really don't want to do, they currently don't want to do? What's changed? 0345 6060 973. Dominic Cummings, it's a big answer to that question. And a slightly less positive one is the almost sociopathic lack of concern that Johnson would have for what happens to the country as long as he can look after number one. And friend or foe of Bojo, everyone would agree that looking after number one has always been his guiding light. George is in Egham. George, what's changed?
Nothing's changed, James.
Oh.
I think nothing's changed, and nothing will really change. I think he's not going to aim to get both parties together on the same page in terms of the no dealers and the ones that are scared of no deal, because you can't do that.
No.
And I frankly think that no deal has been the plan all along. And I think, which will obviously lead to an utter disaster, most likely the breakup of the UK. And I think, again, that is also probably, very unfortunately, by design. Because if the UK breaks up, then ultimately you're left with England, who will probably vote right-wing for quite a while, which means that most likely they're going to be in power for a long time.
If only...
And I think, unfortunately, I'm starting to think...
Go on.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go on, sorry.
I was going to say, unfortunately, I'm starting to think that's been the plan.
Are you? You're a bit further down the road than I am, actually, oddly. I don't think that's the plan from Boris Johnson.
Okay.
I really don't. Not least...
I hope not.
No, well, it might have become the plan, but I do think that his decision to support Leave was built upon the presumption that they'd lose. So it certainly hasn't... It hasn't been a guiding light for him for long to crash out with no deal. He's surrounded himself with people that categorically do... not understand, or and this is where you're getting scared, you think they do understand the calamity, but they see opportunity for a tiny cabal of, well, let's just see whether or not the two most senior appointments he's made, apart from the Chancellor, have ever put anything on the record that either adds to or demolishes your fears, George.
Because I don't think they can be that stupid.
Hang on. Do some theatre. George, I'm doing some theatre.
Fair enough.
I've got to do it all again now. Let's just find out whether his two most senior appointments from the Chancellor have ever put anything on the record that might either allay or endorse your fears, George. Here's something. You see what I was doing now, George?
Yeah.
Here's something. The British are among the worst idlers in the world. We work amongst the lowest hours, we retire early, and our productivity is poor. To even start to compete with the rising economies of India, China, and Brazil, we need to avenge the dependency culture and stop indulging in irrelevant debates about sharing the pie between manufacturing and services, the North and South, women and men. This tract in 2012 advised Conservatives to double down on austerity and maintain their faith in old-fashioned laissez-faire economics. So if, for example, Priti Patel and Dominic Raab had both put their names to that book published in 2012, that would add to your conspiracy theory. In fact, it would turn your conspiracy theory into a valid fear.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm just...
well, it did.
Just a big concern.
Well, there they are. They've said it. If that is the plan, they're the two, and they've got the big jobs. They're the two that have already mapped it out. More austerity, lower taxes for businesses, more laissez-faire economics, fewer protections, and essentially get rid of the welfare state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Happy days.
Are they? I just I just can't believe people can be legitimately that incompetent, which means...
They must be doing it on purpose.
Almost have to be, yeah, exactly.
Well, you've gone for the evil rabbit. So we started the morning in the same place, whereas you look at what's happening and you think there's no way. But the problem is that I thought the same about Theresa May, which is actually quite reassuring, because they can actually be that incompetent. Theresa May proved that. There was no rabbit in the hat. I look at them today, as I said, at 10 o'clock, and I think, well, maybe they do know something we don't. Maybe there is a rabbit, and I'm somewhat naively presuming it would be a friendly rabbit. They can pull something out of the hat that actually would save us from some of the worst pitfalls potentially ahead of us. You think, well, there must be a rabbit because nobody could be behaving this predictably and this stupidly without realising, so they must know what they're doing. But in your worldview, George, the rabbit is evil. You've brought an evil rabbit onto my show today.
Well, maybe it just seems like they've invested so much political capital into this that instead of backing out and looking stupid, but potentially, everyone ending up in at least a decent place somewhat and remaining with the status quo, they're sort of doubling down on this. Which is
why I read you that quote from Britannia Unchanged by Kwesi Kwarteng in the cabinet, Priti Patel in the cabinet, Dominic Raab in the cabinet, Liz Truss in the cabinet, and Chris Skidmore, poor fella. I don't think he is in the cabinet. He must be feeling very bruised this morning. They've actually written it down, and that's who he's surrounded himself with. And we're back to yesterday's question, which is how can a single politician become mayor of London by wooing metropolitan liberals and become prime minister by essentially surrounding himself with people who think the British are amongst the worst idlers in the world? If you think your life's nice and easy at the moment, okay, well, it's possible that Boris Johnson has just assembled a cabinet determined to dismantle that. If you think your life is tough, if you think your portion is small, if you think your terms and conditions are restrictive and unfair, well, it's certain that Boris Johnson has just appointed a cabinet who think you've got it easy. 13 minutes after 11. Michael is in Newbury. Michael, what's changed?
Hi, James.
Hello,
how are
Michael.
you?
I'm grand. What's on your mind?
Rob, let me break it into two parts. So, I guess I'm lucky enough to have worked at a very senior level in one of Britain's largest companies and have done hundreds of millions of pounds worth of deals in my life. And I guess my first observation is, there are two types of deals. There are those where you're buying or selling a car and you can be as hard or as brash as you like because there's no ongoing relationship. And
you've got a car already.
You're right, at the end of it, if you walk away, there are no repercussions.
You keep your old car.
Exactly.
Exactly. Thank you.
Then there are those negotiations, which are the ones that I've mainly done, where you have to keep an ongoing relationship.
Yes.
And therefore, you have to handle that negotiation with care, and you certainly don't use threats, because the moment you use a harsh threat is the moment the chances are you lose that ongoing relationship. And it's quite interesting that the EU prepared for no deal, but never actually used it as a threat.
No.
Because they do genuinely, I think, want an ongoing relationship.
What a clever observation.
I think the first mistake, that these hard right-wing Tories are making is by using this threat.
Because they think everybody else is deep down like them.
They want to haggle like
atavistic.
They haven't got the experience of this type of negotiation. I think Theresa May and Ollie Robbins handled it well, but their problem, of course, was that they were never going to find a satisfactory solution because any deal was going to be worse than remaining and not good enough for the hard Brexiters. So I think there lies the first problem. My observation of Boris Johnson is that I think, and the ERG and the right-wingers, is that they have always wanted their cake and eat it, and they're free traders. They are incensed that the withdrawal agreement was separated from a free trade agreement. And I think they are going to try and use muscle and weight and threat in order to get some confidence that there is a free trade agreement within a reasonable time frame.
Gosh, so you think they're going to be looking for fairly big shifts then, rather than just incremental ones that Boris Johnson could sort of exaggerate and embellish and get through Parliament?
I do. I think they are going to want some words around confidence of a free trade agreement, because that's all they want. They want to have all the benefits without the obligations or the costs.
But that's not going to happen, is it?
It isn't going to happen. That's my view. But
and so what's changed is the level of delusion.
Exactly. And I think, listening to what the EU is saying, I think they've sussed it, and I think they will say, no way. And they're certainly not going to be impressed by use of threats. And, the absurdity that, if the EU wanted to use the threat of no deal, they could. But all they've done is quietly prepared for it. But if you think of the absurdity of both sides threatening the same thing.
I can't believe I've missed that. I can't believe I've missed that. That's an observation of such...
daft.
That's a coruscating observation.
It is.
I like your modesty, Michael. I just described your contribution in the most glowing of terms, and you very casually went, yes, it is. You're in good company.
We'll see, but I think we're going to see a focus around a free trade agreement over the next 2 months.
More time wasting and head nodding. But again, the interests of the country would be served by Michael and I both being wrong, and somehow this being an achievable goal by Boris Johnson. And you'd have to be absolutely daft to be actively wishing at the moment for any of these evidence-based analyses and predictions to come true. But in the absence of any alternative path, where do you hang your hat? So give me an alternative path. What's changed? Oh, it's going to be much better now because 03456060973. And we'll be hearing live from the House of Commons in about 10 minutes, just over, I imagine, where the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will be making his first speech in Parliament as Prime Minister. What has changed? It's a really good question. I think in the spirit of Michael greeting my praise of his contribution to the programme, a very, very casual, yes, yes, I agree. I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back. That's the point, isn't it? Because also, the front pages are strangely muted, and I don't know whether you remember how insane they were when Theresa May assumed the position. The Daily Mail, it had the steel of the new Iron Lady. Do you remember that? Was that in her first? Was that really early on? And it mocked her up like a cross between Margaret Thatcher and Boudica. Don't at me with tales of Boudica's atrocities, all right, visited upon Roman London. Life's too short. But you remember that, when Paul Dacre was editor of the Daily Mail and the political editor who went to work for Theresa May put together a front page which cast Theresa May in the role of Britannia, effectively. The steel of the new Iron Lady, it said 3 years ago. Whew, how time flies when you're having no fun at all. Hey? So with Johnson, they've been a little bit more muted. The Daily Telegraph, which is, of course, completely and unapologetically dedicated to promoting Boris Johnson's career at every single turn, goes for the people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts. Do you know, in normal times, I'd invite you to ring me up and tell me what the hell that's supposed to mean. The people who bet against Britain are going to... Who's bet against Britain, exactly? Hello? See? But they're not quite as declamatory and euphoric as they were when Theresa May got the job. The Times focuses quite rightly, I think, on the cabinet carnage. The Mirror picks up on his first faux pas, which is to reveal some details of what the Queen apparently said to him. He broke protocol, which, of course, traditionally Conservatives don't care at all about royal protocols, when he said she told him, I don't know why anyone would want the job. It's something that I think we could all agree with, Mom. I know you listen most days, Mom, when there's no racing on the telly, so I'd just like to compliment you for the acuity of that political insight. And then the Mail... Well, it's come out for him. It hasn't been an easy decision, I'm told, in the corridors of power at the Daily Mail. So keen are the new regime, understandably, to distance themselves from the madness of the last one. But all guns blazing. It's not a value judgment. It's actually a description. Barnstorming Boris in £39 billion EU no-deal ultimatum. Sadly, that is simply not feasible. Not least because the number has already changed. 39 billion is meaningless on a million different levels, but chiefly because we've already extended. That was what would have been due if we'd left at the end of last March. Cabinet massacre sees 17 ministers out on PM's first day. Not exactly the steel of the new Iron Lady. So the personnel has changed. Let's notice Kay Burley tweeted... I didn't listen to the radio programme she refers to, but a senior EU official says, your Prime Minister has changed, our position hasn't. That seems fairly clear. 03456060973 is the number to call if something else has changed. Because apart from queuing up to describe Boris Johnson in glowing and positive terms with regard to his personality, I can't really see what's changed with the politics. 25 minutes after 11. They're queuing up in the House of Commons at the moment to speak. It's a sort of new day of term. It's actually the last day of the old term, but we won't split hairs. We will cross live just as we expect the new Prime Minister to take to his feet. Before that, plenty of time for you. Nick's in Battersea. Nick, what's changed?
Hi, James. Pleasure to speak to you. I just wanted to say that I think very little has changed other than we're just ushering in someone who's even less prepared to engage in the detail. I think that's sort of clear from the sort of Irish backed up sort of issue. I think, obviously Theresa May's suggestion, because acknowledging it was a very difficult problem to solve, but Boris kind of is just only really prepared to sort of throw out meaningless sound bites and say it's already fixed. But obviously it's not the case, as you've pointed out many times on this programme. So I think really, actually, an analysis from Noam Chomsky about Donald Trump is similar here.
Go on.
He sort of says it's pointless passing the actions of a man with no real ability for analysis. It's kind of the purest acid satire.
Yes.
That's his analysis for Trump. I think it's sort of similar here. Like, we're trying to work out what his grand strategy is, but just there isn't one.
I mean, you might not be able to say that about the people around him. I don't think cabinet government is quite as slavish and myopic as the American government machinery. But I think Fintan O'Toole has written something, and if you're not familiar with Fintan O'Toole's work, I've just done you the biggest favour anyone's going to do you all day by pushing you in his direction. He makes a similar point, I think, in The Guardian today. He's also been writing for the American media, and he has a brilliant book out on the mess that is unfolding on this side of the Irish Sea. But Fintan points out you can't really call Boris's bluff or unmask him, because everybody knows what he is. You know, there is no there's no shame in pointing out his charlatan nature, because everybody knows his charlatan nature, and people, for reasons that elude many, they don't elude me, because I fell for it myself many moons ago. Some people are charmed by charlatan nature. Nick, I'm moving on only because I have to keep one eye on the House of Commons, where Boris Johnson is due to deliver his first speech as Prime Minister, and another eye on my horn. Summon the Usherwood! Gosh, that was quick. LBC's political editor is just coming through the door and sitting down now.
I preempted that one because the Speaker, John Bercow, has just said that he plans to allow Boris Johnson to begin his statement to the House of Commons, his first statement to the House of Commons, on time at 11:30. Lots of MPs asking questions of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the new leader of the House of Commons, on everything. Excuse me, from taxi regulation to the new Prime Minister's record. Boris Johnson is going to make a statement, and we're expecting him to say something on citizens' rights for EU nationals, guaranteeing EU nationals living in the UK citizenship and the right to free citizenship and the right to apply for, if they don't want that, to apply for settled status. And that's part of what we're now going to see, I think, in the picking apart of what the UK government is willing to accept in the withdrawal agreement. So he's going to accept that part, and then, of course...
But that's already in the withdrawal agreement.
It's already in the withdrawal agreement. So what he's saying, what I think we're going to expect Boris Johnson to say is we're going to accept the rights of EU nationals to...
Even in the event of a no deal?
In the event of a no deal.
Well, I think we should all welcome that.
Yes. So there's going to be some good news for the 3 million who live here. Of course, that doesn't guarantee the rights of the 1 million British nationals living within the European Union.
And perhaps this explains why Liam Fox got his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap yesterday. Was it Fox who said they're one of our strongest cards, or was that Davis? I get them a little bit confused.
I don't know why
I'm asking you. I'm the anorak on this, on the quotes of Brexiters used in the past. But either Fox or Davis, I'm Incorrigible, will tweet me in 6 seconds with the correct answer, said, why on earth would we do that? They're one of our strongest cards. So this is you've got to give credit where it's due. That is a progression from the previous position.
And you'll remember, of course, Theresa May's rhetoric early on was, why would we give... Was that the line about, this is a bargaining chip?
That's it, yes.
Why would we give away a bargaining chip? Because we're not necessarily going to get the guarantee from the European
Because they're human beings. They're our neighbours and our friends, our colleagues and our family, Theresa, is the short answer. But, hey, hostile environment.
So Boris Johnson is going to square that one early on. We're expecting him to in this statement. I think we could expect to hear something, this isn't guaranteed by the way, but on that £39 billion, we've talked about it before. When that was signed as part of the withdrawal agreement, that £39 billion divorce settlement bill, the European Union put in a gap. So it is not, that money needs to be paid regardless of whether they give us a trade deal or not, or whatever that trade deal looks like. Boris Johnson is, I think we can expect, given what he said previously in the Conservative leadership campaign, to make that £39 billion, in his imagination, contingent on getting a trade deal from the European Union. He's going to try and create himself some leverage. Of course, the European Union, people like Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, may just say, no, not going to accept that outright, reject it. And then we're going to hear perhaps something on the backstop as well. That's an outside.
We shall watch with interest. The House is now assembled. Boris Johnson has made his first speech in the House of Commons as Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn has responded in terms that I think you would have expected. And the question that I asked you at 10 o'clock this morning has assumed a new, if not urgency, then certainly resonance. And that question is, what has changed? It was suggested that Boris Johnson might make a substantive move on EU citizens living here. The only substantive move he could make in that context would be offering them ease of access to full citizenship, and he didn't. They already have a right to remain. Their settled status is already government policy. So unless I'm missing something, and I stress, as always on this programme, that is perfectly possible. So unless I'm missing something, there was no big announcement there. On the British border in Ireland, his claim is that they have a technological solution. They just can't tell us what it is yet. And they will promise potential or putative negotiating partners that they have a brilliant technological solution, but they just can't tell them what it is yet. That's the new negotiating strategy, which sounds suspiciously like elements of the old one. And on the bill, well, the bill is potentially a little bit more interesting, the so-called divorce bill. It's not £39 billion, so it's already got a touch of the bus about it when you remember very quickly after the nonsense of that £350 million claim put on the side of the bus by the man that Boris Johnson has just appointed to a big job in Downing Street, Dominic Cummings. And then immediately after the truth began to emerge, they all started claiming, oh, well, no, it's just a figure of speech. It's just it's guidance. We never said we were going to spend it on the NHS. We said it would be nice if we could. And obviously it's not actually £350 million because of rebates and facts and things, but it is a number you can just about conjure up out of the ether and offer up as plausible as long as you're taking the great British public for mugs. And the £39 billion, sadly, is the same, not least because that's the figure we'd have paid if we left when we were supposed to leave. The fact that we're leaving on October the 31st means that according to most experts' analysis, possibly not all, but all that I've seen, that figure now is closer to 33 billion, and that breaks down, crucially, into things for which we are probably legally required to pay for things that were entered into under EU law while we were members of the EU. And the second element of it is, of course, that these are instalments paid going forward over several years. So the idea that you suddenly get an injection of 39 billion quid is, I would say, it's very hard to call what is the most misleading. The claim about the £39 billion cheque or the claim about the 350 million quid on the side of a bus. And if that's what we've come to after 3 years, it's simply a kind of revivification of the lie on the side of the bus, but dressed up this time in terms of the so-called divorce settlement, then, well, I haven't said this to you yet today, but I've got a feeling that in 10 years' time, certainly 2050, the year to which Boris Johnson referred, I think we'll all have forgotten about Theresa May. I think if your kids are doing a politics A-level, oh, we're getting old, aren't we? It's going to be my grandkids. If my grandkids are doing a politics A-level, sort of 30 years hence, and they are saying, who was Prime Minister after David Cameron, Dad? I think I'll say Boris Johnson. Unless he's only there for 5 seconds, of course, in which case I'll say whoever comes after him. But Theresa May, when you think about it, and we're not doing legacy, what has she done? All she did was press pause for 3 years. And Boris Johnson has come out and pressed fast forward. And we fast forward immediately to another whopping great nonsense about notional nebulous financial sums. So nothing new on Ireland, nothing new on citizens, nothing new on the divorce settlement. What was new? The golden age that Boris Johnson has heralded in. And if you're falling for that, I've got a bridge you might like to buy. Theo Usherwood.
Can we just start with this issue about EU citizens' rights? So this is, the speculation had been, to be a bit more specific about what we were talking about earlier.
It wasn't just speculation, it was reported by the BBC.
And others.
Yes.
Was that Boris Johnson was going to adopt a pledge made in Michael Gove's pitch to be Prime Minister. And Michael Gove took this from the Conservative backbencher Alberto Costas. And in that would be making it possible for EU citizens living in the UK to apply for free citizenship.
Yes.
So saving those 3.2 million, if they wanted to apply for citizenship, somewhere between £1,000 and £2,000. So that was the key.
And a heck of a lot of worry. And settled status all well and good, but who knows what the future holds.
And if they don't want to apply for that citizenship, allowing them to apply for settled status. Now, of course, the problems with the app and proving for EU citizens that they have a right to live in the UK and to have that settled status has been a worry. There was a fear that it was going to create a new so-called hostile environment. Michael Gove's pledge from Alberto Costas' original plan was to take away that worry by not making it incumbent upon EU citizens to prove that they have the right to settled status. What Boris Johnson only said in that speech in the House, statement in the House of Commons, was that he was going to guarantee the rights of the 3.2 million EU citizens living in the UK.
Which had already been done.
In the event of a no deal, which has already been done.
Yes.
So it may come to pass in the briefings that take place this afternoon that, in fact, Boris Johnson has adopted the Michael Gove plan, but he didn't go into that detail and he didn't make any of those commitments on the record in the House of Commons.
Or he intended to, and someone had a little word in his shell note before he went into the House of Commons and said it's a little bit trickier than perhaps we realise. Because it would be a lovely thing to have announced. It would have actually counted as not huge news, but news at least. What he actually said was just reheating established government
and of course, Boris Johnson is taking questions which I'll have an ear over, and
you will.
And if it turns out that he has in fact made this commitment or not made this commitment, then we'll report it straight away. But that's the gap in what Boris Johnson didn't say in terms of making it cost-free and taking away that burden of proof on those
right. I mean,
citizens.
With respect, the big thing he didn't say was what I just announced is already government policy. No,
he didn't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. £33 billion, of course, that's because we've extended Article 50 to the end of October. 10.9 billion pounds, according to the Commons Library. I did a bit of Googling through the Commons Library when Boris Johnson was speaking. 10.9 billion covers our commitment in the financial framework, the European Union's financial framework, to 2020. So there will be a proportion of that which will fit into that, all of that.
So we automatically won't be responsible for it if we crash out in October 2019?
So
this is complicated stuff, and what Johnson has done, and we're in many ways unwittingly explaining why he's done it, he's essentially just picked a massive number, 39 billion, which is no longer accurate or relevant, and served it up to the British public as something that we will somehow get if we crash out with no deal.
We won't get it, though.
Well, no, but this is what he's doing. He's not mentioning that actually that number is now nonsensical. He's not mentioning that it doesn't work like that anyway, because we were never going to write a cheque for that sum of money and hand it over on the day. A lot of it would have been made in instalments going forward, I think, for decades, certainly for many, many years.
2064.
Yeah, well, that's decades, isn't it? And the other point that he's missed, of course, is that a lot of this money will still be legally required to be paid, if not all of it, under the terms of the laws to which we were full signatories as European Union members.
Yes.
But
when the financial stability framework was agreed back in 2014.
Yes.
To cover that.
Yes.
That period.
Yeah, but he doesn't have to say all that because it's like the boss. He just says, and we'll have to, and of course, finally, every single economic impact analysis undertaken by this government points out that we will be worse off as a country. So although theoretically you could claim that we saved this money that we would have been paying, it's money that we would have been paying to enhance an economic performance to a degree that would have seen us turn a huge profit on that investment. It was, if you prefer, speculating to accumulate that most of that money. So again, but it's worked, and that I wonder if that's the first sign of Dominic Cummings. That's the new bus, the £39 billion cheque that he talked about.
We were talking about Dominic Cummings before, and he will he will remould Boris Johnson. So I think we're going to have a number 10 operation that, unlike the previous number 10 operation under Theresa May, isn't going to conform to the usual conventions of the Houses of Parliament or the usual conventions of government. That there is a recognition that in order to get Brexit through by October the 31st, they are going to have to work outside the model. That's what Dominic Cummings does. He is not a traditional special advisor, political advisor, who is prepared to work within certain...
What are his greatest achievements prior to vote leave? Because everyone's talking about him in slightly hallowed terms.
No, didn't he work on No to AV?
Probably. I mean, they all seem to go hand in hand, but within the context of political advice rather than
he worked for Michael Gove
at the Department of Education,
and David Cameron didn't have many massive achievements, but they, if you can count free schools and further academisation of schools, Dominic Cummings was the special advisor at the Department of Education.
There we go.
Rammed it through, put it through. So that's one achievement.
Yes.
And vote leavers and the vote leaver campaign as well, which wasn't expected to win and ended up winning, which was no mean feat in of itself.
And he started complaining almost immediately about how that victory was being treated by government. The interesting thing, for the record, I think some of what Dominic Cummings has said the government should have done 3 years ago is accurate. Should not have triggered Article 50, but they were in thrall, as we know, to the Daily Mail, who bear astonishing levels of responsibility for the mess that has subsequently unfolded under the new Iron Lady. But this might be slightly too complicated for you and me to thrash out today, especially off the cuff. If he's coming in now, hoping to do what he wanted to do from July of 2016, I can't see that working. And he doesn't look... He's not a no-dealer, is he, Cummings, by any stretch of the imagination?
He previously told one of the select committees that he wanted a reset, that he thought Brexit was a reset.
Yes, but not like going back to ludicrous WTO terms or something like that. No one who thinks we should have delayed triggering Article 50 can think that leaving with no deal is a good idea. I don't know. This is what I mean by saying maybe it's a bit too complicated.
So Cummings' argument was the same as I remember, it was the same as Ivan Rogers, who was our ambassador to the European Union before he was sacked by Nick Timothy.
And whose name is dirt among so-called Brexiters.
But their argument was, we work out exactly what we want.
Yes.
Then we work out what the European Union is willing to accept. And when we have our ducks in a row, we then trigger Article 50, so we don't end up in the situation that we're now in.
Yes.
Without Parliament able to approve what has been agreed by the European Union, that we did it back to front.
Exactly. But that position is redundant now. So he's coming in, what is his vision now? Because we know what his vision would have been in July of 2016. What it is now cannot be the same as what it was in July.
But if I take you back to if we go back to the beginning of Boris Johnson's speech, and we were talking about it just as he was speaking, and you said it wasn't significant, and if I may disagree, I think it is significant, because he's not saying it's the candidate in a Conservative leadership election. He's saying it's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and of Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Is he's saying that a time limit on the backstop isn't acceptable. And that was what the European Union rejected in the withdrawal agreement, and that the backstop needs to be removed completely. And it is almost impossible. It is impossible to see how the European Union can entertain that position.
Backstop was a British invention.
Yes, it was.
And
the UK-wide backstop was a British position, which we said had to happen because we couldn't accept a border down the middle of the Irish Sea.
And the agreement that he described in incredibly negative terms, he voted for, of course.
He did, because he didn't want to be seen as a
what a tangled web we weave. Theo, we may return to you. You're very, very unpopular today, I have to tell you. It's nothing personal.
Really?
A lot of people feel that the more turgid and dense the political news may be, the more that we enjoy the light relief of Mystery Hour. But I've taken... You see, and they've turned on their radios, all the people who only listen to 1 hour a week of the programme, they've turned on their radios, and instead of hearing Mystery Hour, they've heard your dulcet tones.
Can I apologise?
No, it's my executive decision, so Theo bears no responsibility whatsoever for his presence on the radio this afternoon. So a constituency of individuals who I feel have been very, very unfairly treated. Do you know that traditionally the boys at Eton get a full day's holiday when an old boy becomes Prime Minister? And of course, because they broke up a month ago, the poor little cherubs are going to be denied that pleasure on this occasion. That's terrible. Absolutely terrible. I, for one, feel it's important that we remember the true victims of the current political chaos, and the scholars and the Opidians of Eton denied a full day's holiday. It's outrageous. 23 minutes after 12. Go on then, fill your boots. 0345 6060 973. What's changed? Astonishing, really, that question we were wrestling with for 2 hours already, or an hour and a half already, today has become ever more pertinent and relevant in the context of a speech in which Boris Johnson sort of just said, we're going to try everything that we've already tried again. Oh, and by the way, that policy that's already in place for EU citizens, we're sticking with that as well. Okay. What else? The money? I need someone else to explain the money to me, actually. I think I got everything pretty right on that, but we shall... Sheila will probably have a proper expert on the programme, and we'll probably get another one on tomorrow. But that 39 billion, that's the new bus. Mark my words. And you remember how quickly they all disowned the bus, and how quickly all the people that voted to leave the European Union, because they thought that somehow that would mean the NHS got 350 million quid a week, moved within 12 seconds to claiming that they never actually believed that at all. So it will prove with the so-called divorce deal. But what's he up to? I'm going to allow myself a slightly simplistic question between now and full-time. What's he up to? What's he up to? I might say it again in a slightly different tone of voice. What's he up to? What's he up to? What is he up to? What's he up to? I don't know what he's up to. Do you know what he's up to? Gary's in Avignon, southeast France. Do you know what he's up to, Gary?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello, Gary.
I'm a bit nervous, but that's probably because I've spoken to you before. But,
Thank you.
I don't think that Boris has got any intention of leaving the EU.
Really?
Because, well, I mean, if you look at his... first of all, I mean, a lot of people take their political leanings from their parents. I mean, if you look at Stanley and Joe, I mean, their politics is probably left of centre.
It's not left of centre, but it's pretty weak evidence on your part for claiming that he does. I mean, his father was, I think, an MEP, wasn't he, at some point? But Joe Johnson has moved from saying we need a second referendum to taking a job in his brother's government. So I don't know that they're necessarily standard bearers for your scepticism.
Maybe this is all part of the conspiracy, because, I mean, Johnson's only role or ambition is to have a long period of being Prime Minister in this country.
But he can't do that if the Conservative Party gets routed by the so-called Brexit Party.
No, but what he's done, he's in choosing the cabinet that he's chosen, he's actually cobbled together all the incompetent levers, I suppose, that you know, and any potential enemy. Now, under collective responsibility,
yes,
call it pulling the wool over their eyes. I don't know, but I mean, nothing's impossible with Boris.
No, that's true. I'll give you that.
If he say calls a referendum, and because let's face it, it's nigh on impossible for him to get a no-deal Brexit through the Commons. It doesn't matter, you just look at the arithmetic.
Yeah, with the current Parliament, but I think I mean, for what it's worth, I'd put a few quid on a general election sooner rather than later.
Well, I don't know, actually. Would he risk a general... You see,
I think he would against Jeremy Corbyn, mate.
Well, yeah, but with a referendum,
This is why he's leader, Gary. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm thinking out loud. He is leader precisely because an awful lot of Conservative MPs are holding their nose because they think he can deliver victory in a way that Theresa May can't, even on identical policies, even coming from an identical context.
Yeah, but James, he doesn't want to leave the EU, right? Now, the other factor is that I'm not sure about this, but was he... he's an old friend of Dominic Cummings. I think they worked at The Spectator together. Now,
I don't. I could be wrong, but go on.
Well, anyway, I think that they
yeah, go on quickly. Cut to the chase.
For a long time. Now, when he actually decided to vote leave, was let's face it, Dominic Cummings has the same political leanings, i.e. no political leanings, as Boris Johnson.
Well, he doesn't, mate.
I mean, their political leanings are determined by what side of the bed they get out of in the morning.
No. Cummings is a massive ideologue.
Yeah, I know, but he's not renowned for being an extreme right winger.
Well, you didn't say he was. You said he doesn't have any political leanings at all.
Well, I know. He's more of a strategist. So he doesn't.
No, he's not. He just isn't. He's an ideologue. I mean, some describe him as an anarchist in terms of tearing everything up and starting again. I wish I could share your optimism, and I don't want to continue raining on your parade in case your optimism diminishes. And if there's one thing, friends, upon which we can all agree, that is that this is a time for optimism. It's a new golden age of optimism, in fact. I don't know if anyone else has got that memo. Apparently it's a new golden age of optimism. 28 minutes after 12. Thank you, Gary. John's in Stroud. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
yes,
John.
Your original question was what's the difference between May and
well, what's changed? Yes,
Boris.
Still is.
Or what's changed? Yeah. So, well, just talking about those two, I think that Boris is actually more socially liberal than May was or is.
You still think that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Well, if you look back over the voting record, for example, for LGBT rights,
didn't he say that equal marriage would be followed by 3 men marrying a dog?
I think his language.
I believe he's also used the phrase tank-topped bum boys.
Yes, he did use that in the 90s. I've desperately tried to find the actual.
He could still be more socially liberal than Theresa May, even with that on his CV. I grant you, but I don't think that was the point you were making.
No. So if you actually look at voting,
yes,
right. So he voted for gay marriage, for gay adoption. Very important to me because I am one, an adopter, and. I think when it actually comes to it, I know he's blustering, he's full of energy, and sometimes his mouth runs away with him. But I think deep down he is socially liberal. He's a socially liberal conservative. I think, and I might be proved wrong. Let's give him a chance. But I think he's conservatively. It's conservative.
Mate, listen. This is the problem with breaking news. It's just appointed the founder. Sajid Javid has just appointed the founder of the Taxpayers Alliance as a senior advisor. You think we're getting socially liberal, mate? You're in for a big surprise. It's 12:30. I think. I hope not, but I think it's 12:30. Totally ruined my lunch hour, says James Marshall. Sorry, but this is epochal
face some kind
political moments. We're covering Boris Johnson's first speech in the House of Commons as Prime Minister, and that means that Mystery Hour has been cancelled, possibly postponed. Depends what the news looks like tomorrow. But one point you seem to all miss when we have moments like this on the programme. I'm in charge. I really am. It might not always look like it. Touch of the Johnsons, if you like. This exterior, this external appearance of shambolic, accidental, stumbling incompetence. That is mere camouflage, disguising a steel trap of certainty and resoluteness, which is why I have taken unilaterally the executive decision not to do Mystery Hour today. The news is more important. Doesn't often happen, but it's happened today. And the news is Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, but you knew that, and he is pledging to go back to the European Union and say stuff about the border in Ireland, the divorce settlement, and not citizens' rights, which is exactly the same position that Theresa May was in a month ago, except that the European Union said no. We'll let you have another extension. Do you remember what Donald Tusk said? Oh, man. 5 words. I've just canted that on my finger so I don't make a fool of myself live on the radio again. Please don't waste this time. The new chairman of the Conservative Party, James Cleverly, has just tweeted emojis of sad faces, claiming that that's what the Labour benches look like at the moment. Please don't waste this time. Well, the time is ticking, and that's what leaves me wondering what he's actually up to. I have always subscribed, I've taken a day off today from reminding you of Boris Johnson's catalogue of calumny and moral corruption, because he's Prime Minister, and we all want something pulled out of that hat, whatever it may be, ideally a rabbit, although at this point in time I'd take a sandwich. we look at Boris Johnson, and normally we would say he doesn't have a plan, he doesn't have a priority, he doesn't have an idea in his head. All he cares about is getting to be Prime Minister. But he is now Prime Minister. So what is Boris Johnson now, even for his critics? What now? If you've spent, as I have, years saying he doesn't care about anything else except power, he wants to be Prime Minister, the rest is gravy. He is now Prime Minister. Does he have a plan? And if you think he has a plan, what do you think it is? Isabel's in Southampton. Isabel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Isabel.
I just want to respond to Boris's speech today in the Commons.
Yes.
John Bercow said there was too much noise in the chamber.
He did.
And then Boris Johnson said, and there's too much negativity. And it really sent a chill down my spine, because there's an essence of dictatorship there, really, telling people how to respond and what to feel in a way. And then I thought, oh, just calm down, Isabel, it's just Boris, don't worry about it.
That'll teach me. I was about to tell you just to calm down, Isabel, but then it came back again.
It's just Boris, don't worry about it.
Yes, exactly.
But, you know, if we're going to kind of follow up every statement that Boris makes with, it's just Boris, and he's the most powerful man in the country.
Yes.
That's quite dangerous.
Well, I do. You know I do, I suspect. But there's nothing new here. I mean, believe in Brexit. Theresa May would say. Priti Patel, our new Home Secretary, tweeted earlier this week that Theresa May and David Cameron, or I certainly read it as her intending to say that Theresa May and David Cameron, so that would be breaking news, somehow didn't believe in Britain, let alone Brexit. So talking about negativity, and I appreciate there's a difference between a candidate doing it and a Prime Minister doing it, or a kind of parliamentary jester doing it and a Prime Minister doing it. But talking about negativity isn't necessarily cause for profound new concerns. The whole Brexit balloon has been kept inflated for at least 2.5 years by people telling us that if we just believe that things will happen, then somehow magically, by dint of our belief, they will. And the negativity rhetoric is the same as that, I think, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? Oh no, I've bored Isabel into submission. Her final sort of green shirt. Isabel? We lost her. Jack's in Bromley. Try and get her back. Make sure she's all right. I hope I didn't bore her to death. Jack, what would you like to say?
I think Boris has a plan, and I think that Brexit is almost a little bit of a red herring, because if we remember, you know, the two different columns and the sort of pragmatic approach of, you know, is Brexit a good thing or a bad thing, he wasn't sure up until the last moment. And I think so Brexit's not his main concern. Like you just said just a few seconds ago, he cares about power. And so what he's going to seek to do now is win an early general election before he gets Brexit done. Because, of course, we know the problem with Brexit is it promises all things to all people. He can't please everybody, so he wants to secure another 5 years before he has to get through some form of Brexit.
Yes. I think
that's what we see in the language as well.
So what happens? I think I agree with you. I think an election is the most likely target, the most likely goal that he's aiming for. But what happens after that? I mean, that's not even going to take us up till Christmas, Jack.
Yeah, well, I think he's not. I don't think he wants no deal. I think he thinks no deal is a terrible idea. As is, well, hopefully that's what he thinks.
And yet he's surrounded himself with people. I mean, the only apart from Amber Rudd, and she made that very odd intervention a couple of weeks ago when she said she'd be happy with no deal as well. That was the point where I wondered whether her and Johnson were actually in some sort of backroom chats, precisely because she was such an interesting person to pivot. She looked this morning on the telly like she'd been taken hostage, but she would have been volunteering to be a hostage, we have to remind ourselves. She's the only one, I think, in the cabinet who hasn't been an advocate of no deal for a very long time, or at least for quite a long time.
Well, I do find Amber Rudd's position fascinating because she was one of the foremost Remainers in 2016.
She said also when she stood in for Theresa May at that debate, she said she wouldn't, you know, she understood Boris Johnson's appeal, but she wouldn't want him driving her home at the end of the night.
Yes, yeah.
So she's pivoted. So just the point I'm making, I think we're on similar pages. My theory, such as it is, and I'm certainly not chalking this up as an actual prediction, more a speculation, is that he will try to do, just as Theresa May did before him, he'll try to use a general election to get a majority that allows him to get something through Parliament. And like you, I suspect he'll then try to get a slightly rejigged withdrawal agreement through Parliament, because he must know that there's no prospect whatsoever of getting a profoundly changed withdrawal agreement anywhere. Because he needs 27 other EU countries to sign up to that, and they just aren't going to. So general election, and then you think, like I do, that he'll try and get the withdrawal agreement through Parliament. The general election kills off the Brexit Party for 5 years, as done for the last 30. So you get rid of the so-called Brexit Party for 5 years by winning a general election and seducing the voters who, through illness or idiocy, have ended up thinking that no deal is a good idea. And then you chuck them under a bus, get a withdrawal agreement through and try and get a Brino, Brexit in name only type arrangement, which would fit Boris Johnson, who always likes to have a foot on both sides of any fence.
Absolutely, and I think the language
High five,
is crucial.
Jack. High five. Thanks.
A pleasure.
Carry on. And the language is crucial, because this is all about rhetoric, and if Johnson can do anything, he can do... Well, I would have said a week ago, if he can do anything, he can do rhetoric, but the two speeches thus far as Prime Minister, they're very lacklustre. Very lacklustre, I think you'd agree. Quite like to hear what Steve Allen thought of them. Alison is in Maidstone. Alison?
Hi.
Have you seen your constituency MP yet today?
No, I've written to her several times,
I bet she's looking relieved. I bet she's looking relieved this morning. Carry on.
Well, I mean, I'm no Conservative fan at all, and I think, unfortunately, with Boris, that he's a very dangerous person, as you've kind of said yourself about when he was Labour Mayor, London Mayor, that even if you don't support his party, you'll end up supporting him, because he has this way of trying to make everything positive. And what I was saying when I phoned up was that he has an enormous talent of, when you speak the reality, he just says, oh, you're being negative.
Yes.
And I think that has evidently happened already in his first two speeches.
You're the second caller to pick up on that. How interesting. How interesting.
Yeah,
so you say facts, and he says, don't be so negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whether you support Jeremy Corbyn or not, his speech may have been boring, but it was about facts. And the first thing is, oh, you're negative. Or you're the next person to pull him up on something. Oh, you're negative. We have to be positive.
And that's quite fascistic. I didn't quite understand what Isabel meant when she talked about being frightened about it. But listening to you both and sort of knitting together your contributions, that is the idea that if you say anything critical of us, then you are...
But I think
it's not permitted.
But that's exactly what happened with the Leave vote, is that what you end up doing is making these people who are living in really hard times and going, oh, you're just saying my life's going to be worse because you're negative, because listen to Boris, he's full of hope.
He's promised me unicorns. He's promised me unicorons. He said we can have our cake and eat it. He said
back to this thing of war spirit. Oh, look, we won the war because we were excited and we worked together and we were optimistic, and we're not going to war.
No, and of course I've heard that, and I've been waiting for a caller to say it so I can use this line on them, but no caller has said it for a while, so I'll treat you to the line. We didn't declare war on ourselves.
No.
For that analogy to have any meaning whatsoever, we'd have to have somehow declared war on ourselves and then employed the plucky blitz spirit in order to resist all the travails, all the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune brought about by a war we declared on ourselves. Oh!
Yep, exactly. And I think that, unfortunately, if we were... I don't think we'll go to a general election.
Do you not?
I think...
It's a very odd cabinet to have appointed otherwise.
Oh, yeah, I get that, but what I think will happen is that this... Because, unlike May, he has said, right, I'm going to have a no-deal Brexit.
Yes, he has.
But there is a threat there, even to the Conservative parties like Kenneth Clarke, who perhaps don't... particularly, that they will go along with that in the fear of, actually, he's a lunatic enough to do that. He's crazy.
This is the great gamble. Why? The United Kingdom wouldn't do a no deal. They'd have to be insane to do that, say, the European Union. Have you seen the new Prime Minister? Oh, boy. That's an interesting analysis. I quite like it, actually. No one would do that. It would be absolutely crazy. It's like threatening to blow your own brains out to get somebody else to do something for you. And then they look at who we've just made Prime Minister and they might conclude, actually, maybe they are that crazy. It's not exactly an uplifting or a positive analysis, Alison, but I'm not going to malign you for your negativity. Professor of EU law at Bristol University has tweeted a thread which I don't think he's been listening to the programme today. Actually, no, the thread's from 4 hours ago, so it clearly isn't. But he has arrived at very, very similar conclusions to those that we collectively have arrived at today, particularly Jack, the last caller, pointing out, as we have done since 10 o'clock this morning, that a general election looks very likely. Sheila, I think, even more persuaded of that than I am, judging by her little trail a moment ago. And Phil Serpis is this chap's name. I haven't come across him before, which is remiss of me. But he will next start maligning the EU. You saw a little hint of this yesterday about our friends, our neighbours. He was calling them concentration camp guards 6 months ago. But the idea that if there is no opportunity to reopen negotiations, which there almost certainly isn't, rather than saying, oh, well, silly us, we should have believed them when they told us 7 million times, he will say, oh, how dare they? So they become the intransigent obstacle. The general election is fought before October the 31st, which allows him to essentially castrate the so-called Brexit party. And then with that threat neutered, it still might offer some sort of pact to them, but his next gamble is that the Remain opposition will remain disunited, so that the only way that this plan would fail is if the opposition worked together. And that would involve Jeremy Corbyn, Nicola Sturgeon, Joe Swinson and Caroline Lucas suddenly discovering an ability to speak or at least to fight as one. And that means that the difficult task of delivering Brexit gets deferred to the far side of a general election. And he doesn't care what the options are once he gets to the far side of a general election. This, to me, is key. And again, it's speculation, not prediction. But if he kills off the Brexit party, which poses a big threat, this is the problem with riding racist tigers, is that you don't get to choose when you can jump off. So now he's got to try to kill the tiger. He does that by having a general election in which he casts himself, possibly in some sort of pact with Farage's crew, as campaigning not just against the intransigence of the EU, but also against Parliament itself, or the Remain establishment, as he'll probably call it. This is why he's got Dominic Cummings on board, because this is the kind of, that's the word I want, sophistry? No. Manipulation that Dominic Cummings is most expert at. So he fights a general election against both the, quotes, Remainer Parliament, that can't possibly countenance, as he well knows, letting a no deal go through, and against the intransigent EU, which has done nothing but negotiate in good faith and maintain a consistent public position for 3 years. But that doesn't matter, because we're in Britain. And if anybody understands how the media can completely distort reality when it comes to the European Union, it's the godfather of distorting European Union reality in the British media, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Boris Johnson. So election first. And then he'll have a look at what's on the table, what's plausible, what's feasible with regard to Brexit. And he'll do whatever he thinks best suits, first him, second the Conservative Party, third, perhaps, if we're lucky, the country. You can take that to the bank. 12:53. Santi is in Kingston, the United Kingston. What would you like to say, Santi?
Hi, good afternoon, James.
Hello.
Hi. You started this program about asking what has changed.
Yes.
I think nothing has changed because I think the British people, I'm not saying British people, the Brits work very hard. Everyone works very hard, but I think they've been brought up very privileged. They have the right to education. They have free healthcare. If they are single parent, they have right to benefits, free benefit to housing, benefits to everything. They do not fear of lacking of anything.
Yes.
So when it comes to...
Well, I understand why you say that. There'll be an awful lot of people listening, au fait with some of the worst privations of universal credit and disability testing, and they would furiously reject your analysis. But in broadest of terms, we have a welfare state.
A welfare state which takes care of its people and don't let them suffer tremendously.
That's the idea, certainly, yes.
And when it comes down to politics, people don't care. And they wasted their votes in 2016 as a protest vote. They did not care. Some did not even turn out to vote. And now they are regretting it, and it's too late. And that angers me. The protest vote angers me because
I don't know the numbers support you. I don't think people are regretting it. I mean, logically they should be, but Brexit's never been about logic.
My sister-in-law, my sister's father-in-law, an educated man,
yes,
a Brexiteer champion.
Right.
He believes that if we don't leave European Union, we're going to have a European army.
Bless him.
And he believes everything that you hear about Brexit. He doesn't care about Ireland. He doesn't care about any of it.
Why is he so frightened of a European army? Does he know that we'd be in it?
I don't know. He doesn't care. And
does he know that the Battle of Waterloo was won by the Duke of Wellington and Prussia?
Somehow he blocks everything out, and he seems to think that everything about European Union is wrong.
Well, that's my point. He's not going to change his mind, is he? You just said he would.
Not.
No.
And he's trying to change our minds. He's trying to change my mind.
Right.
By saying that we need to leave European Union for the greater good.
Okay. Well, next time he does that, just ask him why he's more frightened of armies that we're in than armies that we're not in, because history's on your side here.
I'm telling him all the funding that we're losing, and he doesn't even care about it. I'm telling him about his grandchildren will not have the same working and travel rights as he will have had in his time.
And he doesn't care, because he's got some mythical notion in his mind, or some fear-based fantasy in his mind of either English exceptionalism or European malevolence. And that's why Boris Johnson needs to have an election, because your sister's father-in-law would vote for the Brexit party in the mindset, the mad mindset you've just described, and Johnson needs to kill that threat off.
The problem is, with the general election, Boris Johnson knows that the Remainers are still divided. Even with the coming general election, if the Remainers don't join together, he knows that if he gets the Brexit voters and they join together, he's still going to have the majority. And that scares me. Whether it scares you or not, it depends on what you think might happen afterwards. But in the short term, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've had a cracking show today, and we've achieved a sort of consensus at the end of it, which is everything Johnson's done thus far, albeit only in 24 hours, looks like preparation for a general election. A general election is more about beating off the Brexit party threat than anything else. And once he's done that, then all bets are back to zero again. He mentioned something about bringing business to thrive in England. Dyson moved business to Singapore. If he can convince Dyson to bring back his business, he can possibly convince all the small businesses it's going to thrive in the UK.
He's going to struggle to do that before October the 31st, isn't he? Especially with no trade agreements at all in place on November the 1st, unless something changes.
And dividing. People don't see it, because generally speaking, people don't care. They cannot see beyond their front yard, because they've always been taken care of.
I mean, you're talking about a sort of paternalism at the heart of British society, and most Jeremy Corbyn supporters, I think rightly, would reject that now after 9 years of austerity. They would claim that safety net is nowhere near what it used to be. But I think that people from other countries perhaps see a degree of complacency in that kind of, well, however bad things get, we'll always be okay. And you're right, I think that does inform a lot of what was perceived as a protest vote. People who thought that they had nothing to lose didn't realise actually that they had quite a lot to lose. And I think they probably remain a key constituency in whatever happens next. Speaking of whatever happens next, that's it for me for another day. A lot of love for the callers today, which is nice, and a lot of hate for me because we didn't do Mystery Hour, which is fine. That's how it works. Keith's more furious than anyone, I tell you that for nothing.